Welcome to the IBS Nutrition Podcast, your go-to source for navigating the complex diagnosis of irritable bowel syndrome. Here, we dive deep into IBS and discover the power of diet and lifestyle to find freedom from your IBS symptoms. I'm your host, Jessie Wong, FODMAP dietitian and a gut expert. For years, I suffered from debilitating gut symptoms that kept me out of work, feeling constant discomfort in my body and anxious around food. Today, I'm in control of my IBS, able to eat the food I love again, travel whenever I want, and spend quality time with loved ones. It is my mission to help you do the same and transform the way you live with IBS. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of IBS Nutrition Podcast. I'm here today with my amazing co-host, Brooke Keenan, who is also our lead Team IBS dietitian here. Okay, and of course, I am Jessie Wong, registered dietitian and an IBS expert for anybody who is new to our podcast. And today we are talking about a very interesting topic that everybody asks us about, and that is what to eat for IBS. Brooke, what do you think of this topic today?
This topic is near and dear to my heart. I'm going to talk about this all day long.
Absolutely. And this is, of course, what we help our clients with, right? Identifying their food triggers and helping them eat what they can eat without causing symptoms. Now, what to eat for IBS can be really tricky because there are many diets out there, and it can be really confusing for patients to find the right diet for them without too much restriction. And that's one of the problems we see is that there's just so much information, not enough direct guidance, and oftentimes a lot of the diets are really restrictive. They don't yield long-term results, and they cause the patients to fail or just have disordered eating behavior because they become so afraid of food. Now, we just went to the biggest digestive health conference in DC, and that was amazing and mind-blowing and really affirms us that there is only one diet out there for IBS that we should recommend as a starting place. Do you want to tell us more? We went to so many sessions there.
Yeah, we went to a lot. So first, we see people that have been suffering for a while. I do think the first step would be doing higher fiber, making sure you're drinking water. Sometimes fat can be a trigger. So once you've done all that and it hasn't really helped, the next step would be doing the low FODMAP diet with a dietitian to help guide you, because it can be complicated. It can be overwhelming. We see a lot of people that have been on it way too long and are then, have maybe more symptoms because of that. So we're actually working on liberalizing their diet as much as we can. But definitely the low FODMAP diet has the most research behind it of any diet for IBS, for sure.
Absolutely. And I love that you talked about increasing fiber, increasing fluids, and maybe working on some of the lifestyle approaches first before trialing an elimination diet. Because elimination diets, again, what we know as dietitians is that it's not benign because it can cause more problems down the road. And when you're restricting huge food groups like FODMAPs or even gluten or, some of the other diets out there like SIBO, Candida diet, or specific carbohydrate diets, they are extremely restrictive and oftentimes not necessary. And when you restrict so much food in your diet, it can actually cause a shift in your gut microbiome. And that's the last thing we want to happen. Now, when it comes to the low FODMAP diet, it is what we primarily use in our practice when we see it being applicable. Can you tell us a bit more about what the low FODMAP diet is and how it is used?
If the low FODMAP diet is a good fit for them, we will start with having them cut out the majority of high FODMAP foods in their diet, and focusing on and trying to make it as easy as possible, providing recipes. So you don't necessarily have to think of all the things you're cutting out, but look at the recipes and just start there. So then it feels like you're just following some new recipes, not necessarily cutting, everything you used to love out. But focusing on some great grocery lists and low FODMAP fruits, low FODMAP vegetables, some lower FODMAP grains, And then we really try and keep you on that restrictive phase for no more than 6 weeks before we start adding in the FODMAPs one at a time to see if there are any that you react to. And this is where a dietitian can also be really helpful, because sometimes people can get away. There's a 3-day diet trial, and I have a lot of clients who can tolerate, day 1 and day 2, but then they get to the day 3 amount and they really can't. So then that you just might have to be mindful of those FODMAP groups when you're eating. But in general, you should be okay to just have a little.
I love what you just said, and let me bring it back. So with the low FODMAP diets, there are 3 phases, and that's often not communicated to the patient when they are recommended a diet from a physician, or maybe they found it on the internet. Now, with the low FODMAP diet, the first phase is elimination, reducing the FODMAP intake in your diet. It's not a no FODMAP diet, so you don't have to be 100%. You can still have some higher FODMAP foods, but maybe at a lower quantity level. So it's called a low FODMAP phase. That's phase number 1. Usually we want the patient to be on it for 2 to 6 weeks, as we are helping them to make sure they're actually doing it properly. And then the second phase is reintroducing FODMAPs group by group. So there are 6 primary groups of FODMAPs, and we actually, in our practice, we break it down into 12 groups for challenge purpose, so that we can really help you identify which group you don't tolerate and what your tolerance level is at. And like you said earlier, right, we do the challenge. Each group of the FODMAP and FODMAP subgroups, we do a 3-day challenge to identify a person's, our client's tolerance level. And oftentimes, our clients will be able to tolerate everything most of the time, or if there's something they don't tolerate, it may be the bigger amount on day 3 that they may not tolerate. So we always start with a very small amount on day 1, and a moderate dose on day 2, and a full serving on day 3. And we monitor symptoms and monitor their bowel habits to see if anything changes. And then at the end of all of the challenges, that's when we expand the diet based on what you tolerate and what you don't tolerate. Now, for everybody starting out, if you need help, if you want the grocery list that Brooke was talking about, we have a free resource for you, and that is our Low FODMAP Starter Guide. It comes with our grocery list and education information on what the low FODMAP diet is, basically what we were just talking about. We also have a vegan protein list, because most of the vegan protein foods are going to be higher FODMAPs. So in that list, we tell you what is tolerable amount for patients who need to be who eats a vegan diet, but still needs to get their protein in. So you don't have to cut out more and more food and end up with just rice and chicken, which is sometimes what we see. And it doesn't need to be that way. When you look at the grocery list that we have, what we recommend is highlight the food you like and go shop according to the list. And when you see the grocery list, you can see, wow, there's so much food that you can actually eat, even on the low FODMAP diets. But some of them are dosage dependent. And so you don't feel stuck. And that's a big problem we see. Okay, what do we want to talk about in regards to different types of diets that we do in our clinic? And also we also heard about at DDW, and that is the gluten-free diet. Would you want to maybe expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so sometimes if we see people aren't responding to the low FODMAP diet, or sometimes if we know people have had lifelong digestive difficulties, we'll actually try and start them on, along with a low FODMAP diet, a gluten-free diet. So really, you're supposed to be avoiding wheat on the low FODMAP diet. So it's not a bigger jump too much to do gluten, although restricting gluten is a huge challenge. But we'll have people also cut out gluten. And again, usually that's the first thing we add back in to challenge that, because that's seems to be one of the most difficult things to cut out. And if we can get you back to eating gluten, then people are generally happier, even if they're still low fructan, because they can have sourdough bread. So yeah, so that we will layer that in pretty frequently depending on people's past history.
Right. And the gluten-free diet is not something we recommend lightly, because it's not always necessary, and it's an extremely difficult diet to follow, unlike what media may be telling you. You don't just cut out pasta, cookies, donuts, cake. You have to remove cross contact and cross contamination as well. It can be really difficult. So that's not something we would wish upon anyone to try out themselves. Make sure you are working with a dietitian who knows what they are doing when they recommend a gluten-free diet, because it is a lot harder than what most people think it is. And then, of course, I mentioned a bunch of other diets earlier, like the SIBO diet, the Candida diet, or maybe even the low fermentation diet that you may hear that can benefit people with IBS or with SIBO. These diets, again, they don't have a challenge phase, which means you are going to be stuck at an elimination phase for long term. And at DDW, they actually compare the results of some of these diets, and it is not recommended. Right now, at this time, the most recommended diet is the low FODMAP diet. We are going to do another episode on the low FODMAP diet, talking about some of the mistakes that we see people make all the times. So you don't have to make those mistakes. But today we're going to focus talking about what is the best diet for IBS, and how can you get started appropriately. So I'm going to put in the show notes or in the description under the video or this podcast the link to get our free resources so you can start the low FODMAP diet appropriately. But Brooke, this is something you know better than I do. Can you tell us what are some of the higher FODMAP foods that we see people react to more often than the other ones?
The research shows, and I find in practice as well, onions, garlic, and mushrooms are some of the biggest food groups that people react to. I would definitely say not too many people are eating mannitol, which is what mushrooms fall in their FODMAP group, but the fructans in onions and garlic definitely can cause people problems. And onion and garlic is in practically everything you eat when you eat out. Most people cook with a fair amount of onion and garlic. So that can be one of the biggest challenges, or the biggest flavor, I guess, too, that people will miss when they're trying to do the low FODMAP diet. So that also will be one of the first groups that we try and introduce sometimes when people are feeling really restricted, not eating onion and garlic.
Right. And usually, to our surprise, most of our clients, after working together, they will be able to reintroduce garlic without any problem at all. Now, with garlic and onion, both of them contained a FODMAP called fructan. And fructan is, of course, a bit notorious and more difficult to digest in most people's opinion. However, in clinical, when you do the low FODMAP diet properly, it may not cause you that much problem than you usually think. So what I would really recommend is work with someone who will help you work through the foundations or the basics of your IBS and really get you to a better place before reintroducing FODMAPs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and another FODMAP group I want to talk about that I hear patients tell us all the time is apple and peaches. So that is fructose and sorbitol groups together. So we talked about earlier, in our practice, we reintroduced 12 groups of FODMAPs and FODMAP subgroups. So this is a FODMAP subgroup of 2 FODMAPs together. Oh, we really have to do an episode where we go through like what are the different types of FODMAPs, how they react in people's guts. But that will be a different episode that will be coming, so stay tuned. But with apple and peaches, so they have fructose and sorbitol, and both of these are more osmotic FODMAPs. And what they do is they draw water into your small intestine, and you may feel like it's causing a lot of gurgling and gushing and maybe even distension in your abdominal area. So when it comes to FODMAP, they have 2 primary characteristics that causes more symptoms in our gut. One is they draw fluids. Some of them draw fluids into our small intestine. And again, they cause gushing and gurgling and maybe a lot of noise in your gut, and also distension, so bloating in the middle of your abdominal area. So some of the FODMAP groups do that. And then all of the FODMAP groups, they are rapidly fermentable. So what FODMAPs are, they're basically fermentable carbohydrates. And when they are rapidly fermented in our colon, they will cause a lot of gas. Sometimes they do smell, but just sometimes a lot of gas. And the trapped gas can cause a lot of pain in patients with IBS. And of course, we know patients with IBS already have heightened gut sensitivity. So any changes of fluid or gas or increasing in fluid and gas in the intestines will cause more symptoms. and which is also why the low FODMAP diet works so well for IBS patients, and it's the number one recommended diet. It is created by Monash University in Australia. It is researched all over the world, and in University of Michigan, they do a lot of research. In Europe, they do a lot of research. And we are just so excited there is a diet that can actually help patients with irritable bowel syndrome. All right. I think that is a lot for our listeners to digest at this time. What we usually like to end our podcast is also sharing a client story to tell you that finding relief from IBS and, of course, actually expanding your food from the low FODMAP diet or any kind of restrictive diet is possible. And I want to share with you this client story. Her name is Jennifer, and Jennifer had intense bloating, a lot of constipation, and she actually went to her gastroenterologist and she got a lot of tests done and got a diagnosis of IBS. And she was told to try the low FODMAP diet on her own. So without being told that it is a short-term diet. So she actually bought cookbooks from other dietitians and she was eating the low FODMAP diet for a whole year. And see, this is where we find the disconnect between patients and providers are is that you may not necessarily know that this is a temporary diet and people get stuck on the diet. So when she found me on social media, she saw me making croissants and she asked me how I could eat croissants while on the low FODMAP diet. And what I told her was I don't eat low FODMAP diet anymore, and she probably doesn't need to as well. And that's when she joined a small group program. And we actually worked through her IBS constipation step by step to help bring her symptoms down. So the first thing we did, now she had significant constipation, and that was causing most of her symptoms and her bloating. So if you are constipated and there's stool burden in your colon and you eat fermentable carbohydrates, aka FODMAPs, the FODMAPs are going to be fermented in your colon. It's going to cause a lot of gas, and the trapped gas will be causing you pain. And that's exactly what happens to her. So the first step, what we did with her is really help her regulate her bowel movement, really help her create a routine so that she would have full evacuations every day. And that reduced her symptom and bloating significantly. Now, routine is key for anybody who struggles with constipation. And what we did with her was really help her eating better, following a meal routine. So she's eating 3 times a day. She's eating well-rounded meals instead of grazing all day long. And we helped her maybe eat a bigger breakfast and have coffee so that she is having that full evacuation earlier in the day. And she's not carrying stool all around her throughout the day that would be causing her bloating. And then after we regulated her bowel movements, that's when we started reintroducing FODMAPs group by group. Now, if you remember, she's already been doing the low FODMAP diet for a whole year on her own. There was some part of the low FODMAP diet that she wasn't doing correctly, right? She wasn't reintroducing food, and she actually also wasn't getting enough fiber as well when she's doing the low FODMAP diet. Oh, again, reminder to everybody, go get our low FODMAP starter guide to help you actually start the low FODMAP diet correctly so you're not making this mistake. And we're going to talk more in our next podcast, the mistakes that we see all the time and how you can avoid them. And this is one that we see all the time. People only focus on restriction and not getting enough fiber. When you don't get enough fiber, you are more likely than not going to be more constipated and have more symptoms. Okay, so and with her, what we did once we regulated her bowel habit to really bring her symptom down was we kept her at her baseline, maybe for a little bit, I think, maybe 3 to 4 weeks. And then that's when we started reintroducing FODMAPs group by group. And guess what? She tolerated all FODMAP groups except one. There was one group of FODMAPs that she actually reacted to pretty significantly, even with a small dose, and that was the beans group. So GOS plus fructan subgroup. So that group of FODMAPs she reacted to very quickly, and even at a small dosage, she couldn't tolerate it. But what I told her at the end of the program is keep challenging it in the future and see if your tolerance level will improve, because sometimes it does take time for your gut to keep healing when you have proper bowel movements every day. And maybe in the future, she'll be able to tolerate, certain groups that she may not tolerate now. And for her, it was only one group of FODMAPs. And she could eat croissants nowadays and not worried about croissants bringing her symptoms. So I wanted to share with you her story so that there is a better way forward. You don't have to keep restricting food, even if that's what your doctor told you to do. If you don't have a true food intolerance, it's not necessary to continue the low FODMAP diet for long term. And we hear that from clients all the time. It's either low FODMAP or a lot of symptoms. Now, in these cases, we really have to dive deeper into your symptoms and see what is going on and resolve maybe the root cause first before reintroducing the FODMAPs. At the end of the program, she wrote a testimonial for us, and she said, she no longer have embarrassing gut symptoms and tooting all day long, because now she knows how to manage her symptoms better and really understands her body a lot better and knows how to resolve her symptoms if anything does occur. So, everybody, I hope that inspires you to not give up and not just live with IBS, because you don't have to. There are better ways to manage your IBS symptoms. Okay, this is a lot in one episode. We will link all the resources in our show notes, and stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast so that you get notifications when we have new episodes out. We are going to record topics about different types of IBS, what to do if you have constipation, diarrhea, or mixed bowel type. We also have another episode about SIBO coming up, and of course, we'll talk more about the low FODMAP diet. So make sure to hit the subscribe button and don't give up. All right, everybody. And thank you, Brooke, for joining me today.
You're welcome. Bye.
Thank you for tuning into the IBS Nutrition Podcast. We hope today's episode has brought you closer to understanding and managing IBS. Remember, you are not alone on this journey, and finding freedom is possible. For more on IBS, make sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, and please leave us a 5-star review. We would really appreciate that. You can access links mentioned in this episode in the show notes to learn more about your type of IBS and how to identify your own food or lifestyle triggers. Register for our free IBS Masterclass, 3 Steps to IBS Relief, for our proven holistic 3-steps approach to managing IBS once and for all. Head to ibsdietitian.com/masterclass to register. Until next time, take good care of your gut, and here's to your health and happiness.